Hello and welcome back to episode 8 of Vocation. My name is Matty, and once again I'm very pleased to have the great Michael Tsarion along with us for this next episode. We're going to be building upon some previous topics, again largely about consciousness and about psychology and about philosophy. All of these things tend to just tie in together. And just to start us off, you have a quote from Erich Neumann. I'll read a little bit about Erich Neumann first and the quote, and then I'll pass it over to you, Michael, if that sounds all right. So just to make sure everyone's familiar again, Erich Neumann, a psychologist born in 1905 to 1960. He was a prominent analytical psychologist, philosopher, and a close student and protege of Carl Jung. He was a key figure in depth psychology, known for expanding Jung's theories, particularly in the areas of archetypal symbolism, the evolution of consciousness, and feminine psychology. So this is a quote from one of his books. In order to explain what analytical psychology means by an archetype, we must distinguish its emotional dynamic components, its symbolism, its material component, and its structure. The dynamic, the effect of the archetype, is manifested in energetic processes within the psyche, processes that take place both in the unconscious and between the unconscious and consciousness. This effect appears, for example, in positive and negative emotions, in fascinations and projections, and also in anxiety, in manic and depressive states, and in the feeling that the ego is being overpowered. Every mood that takes hold of the entire personality is an expression of this dynamic effect of an archetype, regardless whether this effect is accepted or rejected by the human consciousness, whether it remains unconscious or grips the consciousness. Any thoughts there then, Michael? I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you. Nice to be with you again, Matty. And thanks for
Super.
reading that, because in previous programs, more than one, we emphasized what the positive of psychoanalysis was, but it was a transgressive positive. Freud's announcements were enough to lay dynamite under the whole age of reason. And Neumann is here underlining, you see, what it's all about. How can you think that you're going to subject the entire universe and all of its mysteries to the intellect and the rational, and just round the corner you're going to have all the explanations for everything, when you, the very questioner, is a total mystery to yourself, and you have within you these dynamic forces. They call them archetypes. Other people will call them primordial images. But you have these which then are affecting everything about you. They're affecting your intellect, intellectual settings. They're affecting the reason. They're affecting your moods. And of course, they're affecting your emotions, the word that scientists don't like and never have. And as I said, the moods. And you're not in control of them. So this was what put the kibosh on the entire thousands of years of this shibboleth that one day we're going to crack it all. You'll not crack it, they're saying, these psychoanalysts, until you've cracked, so to speak, the mystery of yourself. And you're not going to be able to do that because it's clear that these archetypes and these complexes and these syndromes are operating outside the realm of your reason and of your will. And therefore, you're like a kid on the beach. It's just not going to happen. You don't have the control that you thought you did. Why it took so long, why it took till the 20th century for this to really sink in is one of the great mysteries. You think that somebody would have already pointed well, I mean, Heraclitus did. There were some that did. But they were relatively minor figures, and people thought they were just being poetic. As I said, a lot of what you find in the Freuds and all, you can find echoes of it in previous philosophers and great minds. But they might have been considered a little bit more romantic or a little bit more prophetic, a little bit more right-brained, as we would now use that nomenclature, you see? But it took a scientist, it took a bona fide medical man like Freud and his people to really hammer this home until it was finally had to be accepted. And science then begrudgingly continued without changing, but it did so now begrudgingly. Secretly, there was doubt, there was cracks. And Freud then made a career to prove this point, looking at the pathological syndromes, you see, to point out just how absolutely mercurial and irrational these inner forces were. But that didn't mean that he wasn't then aware that that's only one aspect, one proof. We read from your Theodore Roszak's last week, and I could multiply that by many others who understood. In fact, you could say that the surrealist art movement at the exact time, many of them who were clients of Freud, and we're seeing Freudian psychologists, they understood what I'm going to say next, which is it's not just pathological traits that you point to show the action of the unconscious. It's the whole thing we call creativity, all caps, also comes from it. And that's not negative, right? Creativity is a proof of this unruly, transgressive, unknowable, irrational. Every single one of us knows this because we've all had flashes of insight. We've all had inspiration. If you play music, if you paint, if you do poetry, even if you have a mathematical mind and you're looking up, you're into the realm of ideas, flashes come to you that solve problems. It's all been detailed in the autobiographies of the greatest scientists. There's whole books on this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I know what you mean. So it's largely about it's about what the intellect is within this framework of what we've been discussing as structures of the psyche. And so I guess during the 1800s or so, you had more of this line of rationalism. It's all about the intellect. It was sort of put in sort of the highest pedestal. And then Freud comes along and says, listen, there's all these forces that come through from the unconscious. And then you have his proteges like Carl Jung that goes, here's the different layers of it. And then we work further onto Neumann, who then delineates it even more. And then we're sitting here now another 60 years after that with it. And still we're no further along other than the fact that everybody's mentally ill. And we don't know what that means.
Allegedly, yeah. Yeah. Oh, yes. But this is the modern age cracking open. And somebody could argue it's this revelation more than Nietzsche's God is dead. That has big highlights. That's very Hollywood. That's very, Cecil B. DeMille. That gets a lot of attention. That's on the marquee. But really, when you get down into the nitty gritty, it's this that derailed, the tracks, and then something new was born. And what was, it's not, you can't blame Freud for what came next, but something was going to happen. Something was going to change in the zeitgeist.
Mm. Do you think there's an inversion of energy, sort of, psychologically speaking, of where we were over dominant on just the intellect and all emotion was sort of kicked out of it? Now we're having this correction of where I guess maybe the intellect is turning inwardly and then it's starting to pick apart ourselves. And we're starting to understand these different subconscious structures then and these different emotions. But now it's just a sea of emotion. Whatever emotion says, or people start to say now, instead of I think, I feel. And we're now trying to navigate this without any real sort of rudder or map there. Is that what's going on?
Not to me. Not to me. To me, people are neither thinking nor emoting. They're armored. And what you get is a lot of pseudo-intellectual, people and pseudo-emotional tirades where the element is mostly self-deception, built not just over an individual ontogenetic life, but over the phylogenetic life. So small, accruing because of society's orientation. Then, to be more specific about what you say, it's not that we're over-intellectual. It's that we're over-left brain. When you talk about this asymmetrical division between hemispheres, this is the way to look at it. And this has been a theory that has had to have been upgraded because it wasn't as nailed down just a short time ago. But now you have people like Iain McGilchrist and others who now have a real handle on it, on exactly how the dynamic between the so-called left and right brain. And it's them that we need to refer to, and that I do refer to when I talk about this. But in short, what it really is that the left brain is not actually focused on the material world. It's not as simple as a straightforward one-to-one connection between left brain and world. That's not how it works. And this, because people think that is the way it is, it confuses the hell out of things as you go. What has to be actually understood is what McGilchrist brings to light in his work, and that is the left brain is focused on the right brain's vision of reality. Yeah? It faces not the world, but the right brain, which faces the world. But what has happened is we're not getting a one-to-one true, I call it high-res image of the right brain when when it's transmitted across to the left brain. What we get is this weird edited low-resolution image that's been highly censored and highly edited. We already talked about this editing function, when we talk about dreams being scrambled and other things we don't know about the mind. We talked about this. Here's another iteration of the problem that neurologists of the highest level know is happening. The scrambling of the vision is not being brought through wholesomely by the left brain. It needs that vision, but it's demanded that vision be altered, be flattened, be desacralized. And then it functions, it was, McGilchrist calls it the servant, the emissary, and the right brain is the master. But what has happened is that the servant has usurped the role of the master. It's turned its volume up, and it's done so with the assistance of society. Yeah. Because remember, this wouldn't happen. This would be bred out long ago if society didn't go for it. But society has gone for it. Society has benefited from this left brain enterprise, this industry. So the world around us grows up, the industrial world, the commercial world, right? We find it simpler to navigate, simpler to handle. It's more based in survival. It's more based in power dynamics. It's more based in having and getting rather than in being. It's more accessible to the will to power than the will to meaning. And so we went for it. And we've been carrying on since the Industrial Revolution and before. Had to be from before because the roots had to be, set in before.
Yeah, to birth it in the first place.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Yeah, I see what
the
you
wrong
mean.
thinking has to have a long history.
Yeah. This sort of ties in perfectly with your article, Light, Magic and Masonry. So maybe I'll read a little bit from that and then we'll take it further from there if that sounds
Okay.
all right. Yeah. So let me just share it here with everybody. So again, this is from your website, The Irish Origins of Civilization, titled Light, Magic, Masonry. I'll just start off with a little quote from Arthur Schopenhauer. What light is to outer physical world, intellect is to the inner world of consciousness. And then you carry forward. There are two kinds of thinking operating simultaneously, thinking with the brain and thinking with the mind. The mind and the brain are not the same thing. The latter is basically an organic machine programmed by worldly experiences during our lifetime. The former is a phylogenetic inheritance or archive containing the infolded experiences and understanding of all men and women who lived before our time. Their myriad experiences are recorded in the so-called Akashic record or ancestral mind, or in psychological parlance, the collective unconscious. Indeed, thinking with the mind might turn out to be quite a delusion. It might turn out that we think for the mind. Contrary to what we falsely believe, we do not come into this world as innocents with blank minds. Innocence, as William Blake knew, merely describes the temporary state of mind as it apprehends the world's phenomenon for the first time. However, encountering a world and making sense of it requires neurological and bioenergetic processes, which are both deep and infinitely complex. They are as yet far beyond scientific understanding. This is because their operations are subtle, fluid, and teroceptive. Just to hand it back over to you, Michael, then for a little moment. What do you make of this, of this, the mind, the ancestral mind, the collective unconscious, in regards to what we've been discussing so far?
Well, that last word is key, interoception. When the age of reason was going full blown and we had this distaste of the emotional, now they've done a full 180 switch. The top neurologists are talking about interoception as being fundamental and that thinking is derivative of it. And you and I have talked about it before. Interoception is just this inner mode of feeling which is going on continually, second by second. How am I feeling? How am I feeling? How am I feeling? Like an inner thermostat. And it happens because that thermostat must be, from this emotional point of view, it must be at the right setting. And if it isn't, we have trouble. All sorts of trouble, right? And this is where dysfunctional people who don't feel right, who feel depressed, who feel something's off, hypertension, just feeling down all the time, right? Their inner thermostat is not correct. And it's got nothing to do with thinking, because they'll know that the frontal lobes can be spinning as fast as you want. The sympathetic system can be spinning as fast as it wants, and yet nothing gets done. The cogs are just not connecting. And as a matter of fact, the upper cortexes can make it worse, because you drain off, with all of this mental activity, you drain off the necessary bioenergy that might be needed for you to sustain your life while you're under that kind of condition. So you're just making it worse. You're burning off gas, right? Octane, that you actually need to save while you're in this debilitated state. So you're in a real mess. This is, and if it goes on too long, this is when people start having really major, medical problems like MS and all sorts of other things that, where the energy of the body is completely drained. That means that the original issue that caused the problem may not be that severe and could have been overcome if we have been working in an enlightened way, but we're not. We chase after it through the intellect, but that has no bearing on it at all. And now, finally, this is being accepted by the highest in the land. But more broadly, the point I was making there is that light has some very strange properties. One is that light does not evolve. The light that you see now is exactly the same light that was there at the Big Bang. Light has grades. Everybody knows about the light spectrum, but one of those spectrums does not evolve into the other one. It's the same with electromagnetism. Light can morph. Light can change its form. But light itself in its essence is exactly the same as it was way back in time. And these scientists know it. So what is this guff that they keep giving us about evolution all the time? The fundamental absolutes of the universe, like time. Time doesn't evolve. Yeah. Time is a huge one. Time is eternal, yet everything that is in time is ephemeral. Everything in time passes away, yet time itself never ends. How did that happen? Right? How does that happen? Who ordained it to be that way? Where did it come from? And is that some unempirical illusion? No, that's about as empirical as it can get. All the contents that are in time, in a flow of time, perish. Everything. But time does not. You see? So these are the kind of theories that the top idealist philosophers, people like Alfred North Whitehead and others, were fascinated by. Yeah. But the materialists wanted to dumb it all down. That was their main objective, is to dumb it all down. And they would have continued to do so and been very successful doing so had not the centers from within their own organization, these Kurt Gödel's, these Ludwig Wittgensteins, and many others I could mention, came up as their own poster children, Thomas Kuhn, right, and others, to show what bunk they're being taught from within. They didn't listen to anybody from without. That's never happened. But they had to have people from within their own establishment to put the kibosh on them, and that's what gave us, a new perspective on things. And today we have the same thing. You have your McGilchrist, you have your Ken Wilbers, you have your Arthur Koestlers, I list them all in my work. In fact, in this Light Magic Masonry article, if people scroll down to the bottom, they'll find link after link after link to some very, very, very great minds that have done this. Your Erwin Laszlo's and whatever. And there's many, many more. I list them all in my article on mysticism. Yeah.
I'll read a little bit more of the article. There's one a little bit I want to tee up further before we get into more of this. The difference of the left brain, the right brain, and what a left brain dominant society looks like, because it's so apropos to what we're sort of going through today. And then maybe that offers some of the solutions going forward. So just bear with me one more moment here. So, despite his crucial insight, Schopenhauer missed a key point in his account of will and consciousness. Our capacity for inward knowing and all that attends this introspective capacity is more a case of feeling than intellect. We don't know ourselves as selves. We feel it. In fact, consciousness is more a matter of emotion than thought, the latter actually being a derivative mode of the former. And this is another quote from Erich Neumann. The hieroglyph for thought is written with the ideogram for heart, which indicates that the heart soul is a spiritual principle. And this is from Nigel Pennick. The Stoic philosophy sees the heart as the seat of the human soul. What are your thoughts on that, Michael, of how the relationship between thought and the heart as well, in terms of feeling and of consciousness too?
Well, when we talked about interoception, that's just a couple of years old, within the neurological movement. These fellas were saying it centuries ago or dozens of years ago. You see, it was all preceded by these so-called romantics and artists and
The
writers.
hieroglyphs.
They already twigged it long ago, but nobody listened to them. Now their names are airbrushed, and some new Johnnies from Princeton and MIT are scrawling their names and saying, "Hey, we've come up with interoception. Aren't we good boys? What good boys are we? We've sorted it out." And the audience, who knows nothing about the people we are talking about, they go, "You guys are amazing. Oh my God." Because they have no background to know that some of these ideas have long been ruminated and long been mulled over by any number of great sages from the past. They don't know it. Now, I know it. That's why I go ballistic when I see these people, you got YouTube now, so all the universities have their YouTube pages, and these people come on and do endless amounts of sort of TED Talk type things. And I'm fuming because I know where they got all of this. The theft and the plagiarism and the scavenging is absolutely unbelievable. And the cunning with which it's done and the bankrolling of it. Yeah. They're talking about interoception. And the problem goes back even to David Hume in the 1600s, when David Hume, the Scottish philosopher, said, "I sit here and contemplate my selfhood and nothing comes up. I can't put a finger on it." Well, your problem was that you're thinking about it. If you're in pain, you're not thinking about it, you're feeling. And there's a self behind that pain, isn't there? That's all you needed. So there's a screw loose. And this also is the screw that you can track when you do the back engineering to the kind of left brain thinking that is already mutilated the real image of reality that the more wholesome right brain has provided. Now, the weird thing about this is that the neurologists know how to actually, do surgery. Well, sometimes they have to, because there's so much left brain damage that they have to cut it off. And this will mean that in many people, there were patients down through the years, they only have right brain cognition for maybe a short time in their life or whatever, right? These are these case histories. Have you any idea of the reports from these people about what happens to them the way they start seeing the life and the universe when only the right brain is functioning? There's case histories of it. And the horror that happens to them when the left brain gets reattached, so to speak. It's like being plunged into hell. Right? See, the scientists want empirical research. They've got it. They already have it. And they've had it for a long, long time. So then this brings up the question, what is the right brain? Well, see, that's a mystery. We're never going to know. And we're certainly not going to know when the left brain is in charge. We can only speculate about it. Each person has to speculate about it and try to use their imaginations to think about what is a more holistic view of life and myself. Because the image of yourself is also deeply, remember we said that the conscience, it really is about a imago. It's about an image of yourself that gets suppressed by the other image that's installed in the superego. Well, this is another way of saying it. The right brain has its image of you along with the world, and the left brain has an image of you along with the world. So you are definitely a divided being. Yeah. But left brain thinking will finally desensitize you. And this is why people should pick up, McGilchrist's first book, The Master and Its Emissary, and read it from cover to cover. It's absolutely brilliant. He does get into philosophy. He gets into Heidegger and Merleau-Ponty, which I found to be fascinating. and it's written for laymen, so it's very, very, very good. And there's lots of videos, that he's done on it too. Lots. So, yeah, people need to pick that up and go through this because it's vitally important. He's one of these dissenters, but he's a top insider, a very, very eminent scholar. He has all the qualifications and more. He's very, very good friends with other eminent ones as well, like Michael Gazzaniga and others who've, worked on this problem. But I like it because many of the things that they have discovered were already implicit in the William Blakes and many others I could mention, in years gone past. But maybe the language was a little flowery or the language was a little poetic, so a lot of people didn't quite realize. But I care about it. I'm a purist, and I care about the fact that these ideas are now being substantiated of people that are kind of forgotten now.
And just to take the macro picture again, when we're saying left brain, we're sort of like analytical, sort of linear type of thought, mathematics, that type of thing with it. It's about breaking down, deconstruction, whereas the right brain is being the contrast to that. It's more about construction. It's about a holistic view of everything. It's more artistic, more poetic, all of those kind of things. And this is beautifully written about him when he speaks of the split brain sort of experiments of where they literally did just cut people's brains. They separated the different parts initially regarding epilepsy is why they started it. One of the things you get into the article is another characteristic of light. And it's about this duality of all things, that whatever you shine light on, you put something else into the shadow or into the darkness. What do you see as some of the issues that comes around with the intellect, with this sort of inner light that goes on? What blind spots does it leave people?
Well, any kind of thinking is going to be limited to a degree because that's just the way it is, right? The mysteries are so vast. But we have elected to use the left brain. And once you do that, then society backs it up. So this logical, limited abstractions, you see this way of abstracting from reality and then looking at the parts rather than the whole has become endemic to our society. And our language represents this. And as we were warned by very great men in the past, things like intuition and imagination and creativity would end up suffering, as it has. Yeah. So this linear approach is really one of abstraction. Now, why we do it, though, is because it's key to survival. Animals develop the left brain hemisphere for exactly this purpose, to be able to feed, to be able to take their focus from predators that may be circling around them so that they can focus on the seeds, the tiny little seeds that may be amongst a bunch of stones. You don't want to eat a little stone. You want to eat the seed that's hidden in the stone, right beside it. So you needed this highly focused, canalized vision, while also you had the peripheral vision. So this was the practical purpose that the neurologists always give you when you talk about how it all began. It doesn't mean it's true, right? But it has elements of truth in it. And so then we as people, even in the human being, started to operate from the same point of view because we needed these survival skills as well. Nobody can understand why it was that 1 million years ago, whatever the fuck it was, right? We even started standing up on our own 2 feet. This is not a good thing for survival. It's an extreme handicap. All animals are parallel to the earth. Only human beings stand up upright. And it's not a good thing. It's not good for survival, and nobody knows, no one on the earth knows why we did it. Because it actually makes us vulnerable to every other predator around. And when you say, well, it led to this and that and the other, yeah, but it did so millions of years later. Having good eyesight and having 2 free hands was a benefit that came from standing up, but those didn't come in right away. You had to wait more millions of years to get those attributes. So that still leaves you the question, why did we stand up against all the other creatures in the world? Why? It wasn't even good for our skeleton or for our organs. Loads and loads of other things had to change. In largely, ultimately, for millions of years, it was a detrimental thing, yet it happened. What does Darwin talk about that? You see? So this allowed some more speculative minds to think about, well, maybe it's our explanation. It had to have a reason, but we're just not looking at it because we're all caught into the survival philosophy. And it's the same thing with what I'm telling you now. Yes, the left brain cognition has helped with our survival. But is there some other reason for this divide, this split? Because somebody, these Theodore Roszak types, can argue that it's helping with our survival up to now. But now we're on a different part of the bell curve. We're heading downwards. The left brain thinking is actually part of the decay of civilization. So much for your bloody survival. It only helped temporarily. It's a flash in the pan. And that's what they are arguing. McGilchrist has built an entire career out of arguing this point. So survival be damned. And also, we don't know that there might have been another method of survival with more whole brain thinking. We have no way of knowing that. So the whole thing becomes a moot point. There may have been other forms of living and existing that could have handled it. And this is why then I chose in my own career, you see, to start looking, to more broader controversial concepts like catastrophism, for instance. I'm the one who brought that into this movement. The only one to talk about Immanuel Velikovsky, and theories of Earth cataclysm. It became central to my work on Atlantis, but I quickly took it from there and went in a psychological direction with it. Because we need other causes for these anomalies. Like I said, the standing up on all fours, and having the hands free and all these different anomalies. And I write about all those anomalies in my Atlantis book and Atlantis program. There's loads of them. You can't even get to the bottom of them. Yeah. Anatomically and what have you, right? So these narrow little scientific paradigms, they just do not cut it. Why human beings have the hair that they do or don't have hair that they do, their thumbs, their hands, their eyesight, their upright posture, their canine teeth. The list goes on and on and on until you start to realize this has got nothing to do with survival or only partially to do with it. But this is where there's then a meltdown. This is when you get your Lloyd Pies writing books, that say everything you know is wrong. And believe you me, people do not want to reach 35 years of age, pay all the money that they've done to go through the top universities to have somebody tell you that. Yeah, they don't. And they won't. And so they just bypass people like us. But when I went to these Velikovskys and Cummins Beaumonts and other people that I read on the Catastrophe, I wasn't unhappy with what I found. You see, you can go and read it and go, okay, sorry, I made a mistake. This has got nothing to do with anything. No. Many years ago, right? In fact, this even goes back to the 80s, believe it or not. I found what I was looking for. And it just happened to be in all the ancient Irish myths, that started me off on it. But I found out that these worldwide myths also talked about it too. Plato talks about it. It's all over the place.
Will you go into a little bit more detail, though? What was this giant catastrophe that happened? Where was this sort of chronicled in the Irish myths? How does that really play into
many
it? What goes on?
catastrophes.
Yeah.
The mythologies really focus on one that happened about 13,500 years ago. But that doesn't mean that there weren't ones. Yeah, but it doesn't mean that there wasn't ones before that, and it doesn't mean that there were ones after that. We have the Bronze Age famine that hit Ireland and England. We have the Storega tsunami that hit Norway and the north. So we have a cometary disaster that's been very, very hard to date. But those might have even happened between 6,000 and 3,000 years, ago. And we have all sorts of other crazy stuff. We've got massive volcanoes at the time of Akhenaten, and it just goes on and on. And some of these things were not localized, small events. They were absolutely gigantic. Whole mountains were torn up out of the earth. I mean, take away the water from the Pacific Ocean and take a look at our earth. Granted, that might have happened millions of years ago, but the point is made. Unimaginable disaster took place from cometary strikes, from asteroids, from meteors. And again, the myths are filled with it. And so I wanted to then write books, and I did. My first book started to talk about this catastrophe and how it needs to be factored in. And I was the very first one to ever really do this. in the way that I did it. Because I was talking about this ancestral trauma that came out of it as being something, a factor that you needed to know when you started asking the questions that we're doing right now. Why did the brain hemisphere split? What could have caused that? What could have caused this absolutism when it comes to survival? You see, if Theodore Roszak was right in his comments that we read last week, then we have an ancestral reservoir of such deep knowledge of nature, then we know how to survive. It's been built up through millions of years. Then what would have caused a breakdown in that? There's only one thing that could be, and that's Earth catastrophe. So then I asked myself, why is it that nobody pays attention to it? You can go back to the 17 and 1800s in Ireland and go up to places like Donegal and look at the lakes, look at the little hills everyone thinks is so, gorgeous and romantic, and just realize that 100 years ago, nothing looked the same. There were no lakes in the places that they are now. There were no rivers in Galway. It all was completely different just 100 or 200 years ago. Things changed so much you couldn't even believe it. Yeah, that's right. There's actually maps showing this. But the catastrophists were parked because the mainstream uniformitarians don't want you knowing about any of these things I'm talking about. You see, because again, it's a part of a conspiracy. Yeah. They like the fact the leaders at the high table know about this catastrophe and its effects that have so weakened the psyche. And they don't want the average Joe knowing about it. So they refuse to publish books on it. And they don't want anybody talking about it. To clue people in to know exactly what this ancestral trauma was and how it affected us. And all my work down through the years has been to unpack it. And believe you me, it goes into amazing things, right? See, people think this is unimportant. You wouldn't believe where this goes. On Enslaved, I got, dozens of programs trying to go into this to show all of its ramifications. It had consequences for history. It had consequences for the sexes, for religion, and definitely for science, and in general, for our outlook. So when you want to understand the mechanisms of the left brain, it's going to take you on a vast journey. You see, you can't answer that as to why the intellect took over. And also, don't you see how this impacts the idea that there's a veil been brought down between us, between conscious and unconscious? What really lies in that unconscious? This explains it as well. So when I was reading these early works, I got the answer of what the unconscious is. That wall, that veil had to come down because in the back there is the bloody raw living memory of a wound that goes to the root of consciousness itself and has plagued man ever since, down through the millennia. And it's only in recent times that we have gained the amnesia, what Velikovsky calls the historical amnesia, you see, to close ourselves off from it so that a new kind of existence can take place. And what do you think the engine of that new existence is? What is the brain behind it? The left brain. The left brain dominance took over the wheel, said, I'm your boss, I'm your leader here, I'll get you through. What we would call the ego, right? As Freud said, that shrunken feeling that once was much more expansive, connecting with the whole universe, but now is a more shrunken feeling. See, I was able to work it out. You cannot find the answer unless you step out of this narrow academic bullshit and start looking at these great minds. And the fact of the matter is that other than Wilhelm Reich, the most demonized man on the planet Earth, haunted by academia, was Immanuel Velikovsky. Now that should tell us something. Yeah. All throughout his life, the poor man was raked over the coals. His books were banned. Phone calls were made, so publishers dropped him. Every single one of his predictions about our solar system was ridiculed. And every one of them finally proved true. The temperature of Venus, the spin of the planets, and every other thing that you can imagine was proven 100% correct, even in his lifetime, but that didn't stop them dragging him over the coals. And the witchfinder general that persecuted him all his life, none other than Carl Sagan, the people's champion, the great Carl fucking Sagan. Have you any idea of the monster that guy was and who it is we build statues to? So I specialize in these other guys. There's information on my Irish Origins site where you get this article from about Velikovsky, about Beaumont. Because this is where you go to find the answers to some questions that seem completely unrelated at first. But no, they are related. And there's been a massive, massive conspiracy within academia to hide these facts from us. And if they see a little student coming up, writing papers and dipping into this stuff, oh, fuck, you're getting the Fs, mate. Yeah. We'll want to talk about, some minorities or critical theory or some race theory. Yeah. Let's talk about how every other, race is greater than the white man. Then you'll get A's. Yeah. Go and do some research in the Amazon jungle of some, pygmies and tell us how they live. And by God, you'll be a professor overnight.
Don't study your own history. Yeah.
No.
Don't look at that.
Oh, no. No. Look at Ireland. Do you think they give a damn about, the history of Ireland? And the history of Ireland is entirely about catastrophism from the first page onwards. They talk about Ireland being only one little field and how it rose out of the waters and became more than one field. And then they could sustain life. Okay, why that motif? Where did that come from? Ireland being one field and the deluge, subsiding, and suddenly, now it became habitable. Then the first peoples that arrive on it are coming from ruined lands, sunken lands. And by the time the great pre-Gaels get here, they are coming from 4 destroyed lands. Destroyed lands? What are you talking about? Destroyed lands. When did that happen? The survivors, and the leader of that group is called Nua. He comes on a boat that he built to save his people from a deluge, a great catastrophe. And he saved them and they all came to Ireland, and his name is Nua, also pronounced Nada. Yeah, you're right. We don't know where that ended up, that story. Okay? So then I start researching this, through all the different highways and byways to find out. And there's no way that these catastrophes, should they have happened in ancient times, that they didn't have an effect on human consciousness. That's ridiculous. And we know it did. And so the kind of consciousness we have now is exactly that. It's a deeply, deeply traumatized, so much so that it's only in recent times that any kind of real healing has taken place that now allows consciousness to very, very, very tentatively start turning again to introspect, to look at itself without fear. Before that, you were paralyzed. Just as you would today if you went through a volcano or tsunami and then, what they call PTSD. People are frozen, like you go through a major car accident, right? Or a bomb attack, right? You should know all about that living in Northern Ireland, right? So people are frozen. People are in a state of neurosis for the rest of their lives, right? They get the jitters. Yeah. Everyone should know this about people who come out of war, army, the PTSD, and compound PTSD, which is another form of it. You see? So this is what happened to the whole human race. And until you've got that piece, that's why I edited my books time and time again to make sure that no matter what theory I'm talking about, even though it may look different on the surface, there will be a chapter, there will be passages on this ancestral catastrophism. In every book I've written, it will come up. Sometimes even right in the first pages, to make sure that that is fucking nailed before we move on to something about today's world or whatever.
Yeah. So essentially, just to make sure I'm following, man used to have a kind of oneness more so with nature. I think we described it previously as the participation mystique, or original participation. We've had these massive catastrophes then that has traumatized man. One of the ways man has tried to deal with it or evolve with it is they've sort of split their psyche in a kind of way. In the same way you can't look at a trauma, what you've almost got to do is dissociate from it. And what's been going on then is we're trying to recover from this type of trauma, and eventually that what has grown from an ego consciousness has now maybe stabilized to such a degree that we can now then begin to introspect more reintegrate these lost parts of ourselves, reintegrate parts of the unconscious. Hence why we're seeing on the collective level the advent of psychology 100 years ago. We're going into the works of Jung and then moving on to where we are today. And it seems that the architects of control, the people that tends to know this information, go, oh, well, this is great information you can use then to dominate people or to dominate society or try to tyrannize them. If you can continually try to re-stimulate that old trauma or new trauma, that reverberates back and calls up this old trauma and continues on this pattern of dissociation that's occurring. Is that kind of how you see how the architects of control use this information then regarding people?
Oh, yes. I'm glad
Yeah,
you
that's
so
it,
well
exactly.
put, very beautifully summarized. That's it. That's everything I've worked on for the decades, is to prove this. To do that connecting, that even the conspiracy, because although the rest of mankind has not known any of this, they have. They've read the books. They find out about the catastrophe. Originally, it started with high priests. See, the most
I was going to
devilish
ask,
thing that's ever
yes.
existed on this planet are the priests.
How does this tie in religion? Just from macro picture? Yeah.
Well, that's it. The high priests of East and West came across this information that we're talking about, and many other things beside, right? And they realized that they were custodians of the healing. But anybody who has control over healing mankind can also withhold that healing and can subvert it and say, well, maybe we don't want people healed. I think they're better when they're towing the line, when they're at heal, when they come to
Mm.
heal. And
Give
so
power.
this is where your black robes. Now, this was especially true when we had the cometary disasters, I found out. At this time, there was a very strong element that started to then subvert. But it wouldn't be the
Mm.
only time.
It's
But,
13,000 years
but the
is the Comet
cometary,
one.
oh yeah, it's hard to say. Each person who studies it has a different, idea. But the thing is that Cummins Beaumont wrote a book on it called The Mysterious Comet. I would refer people to that book. But there's also Allen and Delaire, When the Earth Nearly Died. It's almost an encyclopedic work. And then they have a slimmer, easier to read work called Cataclysm. Allen and Delaire, Cataclysm. These are good starters. Now, basically, they're saying that, or they're not saying, but I'm saying that the priesthood really doubled down when we had the comet symbolism. So much so that huge evil priesthoods, like what we would call the Setian Atonists, I talk about them in this article a little bit. They arose at this time. Akhenaten
This is
was
the
their high priest.
Egyptians.
Yes, Akhenaten was one of their
That's
high
the thing.
priests. He may not have been
Mm.
the only one, but he certainly was the one that was the rock star of the time.
He was the pharaoh. Is
Yeah,
that correct? Yes.
yeah.
And then they were at the pinnacle of their society. They were the priest king that everyone else looked up to. And then it, line out their ideology then a little bit. What is this Atonists?
Well,
What are they thinking?
on paper, books and scholars think they were sun worshippers. They weren't.
Mm.
They were worshippers of a comet.
Right.
And that was came down to us, is known in the Egyptian as Set or Sethos or Sutek, right? In Hebrew, it's El Shaddai, Shada. In the Irish, it's Shet, like the Shetlands, because the Shetlands was an island that was wrecked by the coming of the comet. The northwest in Scotland was one of the worst hit places, and the entire topography up there, bears witness. Like I said, these Storega tsunamis were after effects that cut the fjords of Norway. You can imagine the devastation. It's all written in the mythologies. And recently they found that the coastlines of Britain clearly show you that it was a catastrophe, not slow, gradual changes. They had the cameras to go and look at the coastline underneath the water, and they now know categorically that some tumult, some cataclysms took place to shave the continents. All right. It's all out. But of course, they suppress it. But I've got all the links on the Irish Origins website to these great reports that are finally come out. So they weren't sun worshippers. They were only sun worshippers in public, because being Pharaoh, right, he had a public duty, like all the pharaohs did. And so all the pharaohs had what was known as a sort of a public face, where they worshiped some public gods, kind of well known to the public. They kind of knew these gods. They were in the pantheon. But behind closed doors, the private families that made up the nobility all had private forms of worship. And this private form of worship, the ordinary public had no idea in the wide world what was going on. And so the Setian Atenists, that's what they did. They kept the outward image of being solar worshippers. That was just for the proles, while they worshipped other properties. And I've written 2 volumes on this, because there are certain properties of light that also need to be understood, just like there is properties of the left and right brain that we've talked about, right? And it's a long story. And then that involves Ireland because the daughter of Akhenaten made her way out of Egypt at a time of great upheaval, and her people arrived in Ireland, and she's buried in County Kerry. Not many
What
people
was
know
her
that.
name? This isn't
Meritaten.
Scotia.
Scota is her
Meritaten.
nickname, and Scota
Mm.
meant the dark one.
Mm.
Not because she was physically dark, but it was her temperament, her personality. And I have her down as the most evil woman in history. So she brought her Atnas Setians to Ireland, to Britain, in other words, right? And they've been ruling us ever since. They didn't go away. That dynasty, when the Irish moved over, when Irish tribes moved over to Scotland, they brought her name. See, Ireland's first name was Scotia, after her. But when the Irish moved over to colonize Scotland, they brought her name, and the Scots took up the name and became known as the Scots, or the Scots, or the Scotland. But actually, long before that, Ireland was called Scots, or Scota. Yeah, you can see it on early maps. Okay? And the annals of Ireland prove everything I'm talking about. So I have them, in my books to show people what this is all about. Yeah.
What's evil about her ideology? What's going on there? What earns her that title as this Satanist?
Oh, well, many things, of course, because what they did was they wanted to colonize the Druids that they found here. They were half Scythian. There's a whole story here, and they went back to Scythia. When they left Egypt, they tried to go and find residences with their friends.
Scythia is Persia type, is it? Or am I way off?
Well, it's where we would have, northern Turkey, sort of the steppes of Russia. Yeah. In those days, it commanded a huge area, right? And the Scythians themselves were very well known as one of the most advanced peoples on the earth. And so this group that we're talking about, they're known as the Hyksos, that Meritaten led. They were already pretty ruthless in Egypt at the time. They had already got a very, very bad reputation. And so they were already known. That's why they got thrown out of their own country. Right? Akhenaten was deposed. And his dynasty was finally thrown out. Now, this happened twice. The Hyksos were attacked and thrown out of Egypt twice. But they managed to, gain power again. But finally, when this main family was exiled, Akhenaten was killed, and Meritaten, she had 5 sisters, 4 of who died in a famine. So there's only 2 that were a plague, actually. So she survived the plague along with 1 other daughter, and things were a bit hot, so they could find homes easily remember, the pharaoh is one of the most powerful men in the world. And so he had tremendous colonies and other friends. So they moved out to certain different places. A lot of these Atenists went to Athens. That's why Athens is even called that. Yeah, and Tanis, they had other small centers. This impacts even the story of the Israelites, by the way. When you get into the deep weeds of it, you find out something extraordinary there. And when the Israelites talk about the 10 lost tribes of Israelites, they themselves talk about 10 lost tribes. Actually, what they're talking about is the movement of the Atenists, believe it or not, in disguise. That was a story to talk about Atenists, but it was disguised as Israelites, so I go through that in my book, In the Irish Origins of Civilization, to clear that up. And again, even that story talks about them moving west, just like I've been saying, they did move west. So when you look at the symbols on the Ulster flag, and not just the Ulster flag, but other symbols in Ireland, you see all of their symbolism right there. And then you find out that the Queen herself, or at least one, maybe even her daughter, but it wouldn't matter anyway. It wouldn't matter anyway. Her ashes, her body was entombed in Ireland. What the hell do you do with that? And that's not the only instance. That's not the only instance. There's a long ancient connection even going before that between Egypt and Ireland. Yeah. So Ireland became the new center of this Atenist regime. But to do that, they found themselves in rivalry with the Arya, right? The High Arya that also had Ireland and Britain as centers, And so there was a war. that the ancient annals of Ireland talk about. And sadly, these Atenists, they weren't called that. They were called Milesians in Irish history. They won. They took over. Yeah. And so the Druidic power was weakened substantially, and the Milesians were able to assume control. And of course, then this was a disaster, that affected the rest of the world. So this is why they're evil. This is, to me, what happened. It's all based on a tremendous hegemonic change. And then she became the new head, not just of these secret societies, the Setians, but then have a separate project called the Female Illuminati, because one of the oldest secret societies in the world was Egyptian, and it was all made of women. Believe it or not, that's a funny thing to say, isn't it?
Yeah, people think of Freemasonry more so, but
Well,
carry on
and
first. We'll come
he
back
was
to
the
that.
head.
Yeah.
You can see her symbol. See, when we have a thing called Scottish Rite, it's not based after the land of Scotland. It's based after the Egyptian queen, Scota Rite. But she became the head of this much earlier female secret society called the Dragon Court. They have many names, right? Yeah, they have many names, but they were the original Dragon Court out of Egypt, going way, way, way back before all the male secret societies. So Meritaten became the head of it. It's not as simple as I'm saying. There was a conflict involved, but and this is secreted in the Bible. This is all secreted in the Bible. You wouldn't know what you're reading if you read it, but it talks about her assuming control. It's very craftily and cleverly done. Christians know the story, but they have no idea what they've been reading. It's pretty typical anyway. But she took over the power of that order. So there is therefore operating in the world a extremely sinister female secret society, the Order of Sion, that's basically, in charge. And they give the rights. They are the ones that give the rights then to all the other male secret societies, who are basically acolytes, castrati. That's why they use the symbols that they use, because they are the Galli, they are the castrati, the eunuchs who serve the female power. So I've got a very long program that I made, called the Female Illuminati. You can find it on Slave. People can watch that. They know all about this. Or just visit the website. There's some really good free articles there explaining all this.
Yeah. And this ties into, earlier you had mentioned sun worship being part of this, and about Akhenaten, and then you had the public face of what they believed and then the private face. And another way of sort of saying it is you have the exoteric and then you have the esoteric. And it sort of brought me back into thinking, when we're speaking about exoteric, esoteric, we think about these secret societies and about sun worship, about light. We'd mentioned Freemasonry before then, and Freemason had started in Scotland, if people are not aware of that. So you'd mentioned the Dragon Court, and the Dragon Court is the Order of Sion. Is that what you were saying, or are they sort of the same thing essentially?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So this.
Oh, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
This,
Yeah.
This ties massively back into what happened in 2,000 years ago. I'll have to bring Ralph Ellis on soon, I think, to start this conversation as well, because this is where this ties in so beautifully to it.
I would totally recommend that. Yeah.
Yeah. Especially the Order of Sion, what was going on with the Knights Templar and things. This is the history of Europe the last 2,000 years, and you have, as I mentioned, the exoteric and the esoteric, and that's one of the things we'll have to be focusing on going forward.
Yeah.
Have you anything to add there, Michael? Or?
Well, only that Ralph does not focus on the female side of it as much as I do.
That's right.
He does talk about them, but he doesn't take it as far as I do. But I'm sure we'd be in agreement anyway, because he really does show them. These are the red-headed queens that he talks about of the House of Parthia. These are exactly the same people I'm talking about.
People will be shocked to hear that there was Egyptian mummies with red hair.
Oh, of course there would.
How many people know that? Yeah,
not very many.
That's fascinating.
These are other things that have been suppressed. There's worldwide, suppression of this Aryan group and the conflict that they've had with their enemies.
If we were to take a macro picture now, and if I was to sort of tie you down and say, who really runs the world? Who are these secret societies that we're mentioning different names, the different types of them? But if you really had to boil it down into sort of the essence of it, what would be your answer for people coming into this initially?
Well, I call them a Black Lodge, just generally.
The Black Lodge.
Yeah. And you can call them also the Fourth Sect.
Yes.
Right? Is a very good word for them, because this would help explain things, and we do use that term to explain things. But they're basically these Setian Atenists.
This is it.
Yeah. They go back to this comet worship, and it has its origin in a very, very ancient form of worship of a destructive power, you know, a
Mm,
serpentine power. And so they're
mm,
still their descendants still exist. But
mhm.
the fourth sect was challenged by the fifth sect, and we know the fifth sect as original Roman Catholicism out of Rome. You see?
If we can pause there for a moment, these different sects, just for people coming into this, these are different Judaic sects, is that right?
Yes,
These are different sort of branches of Jewish theology, I guess.
that's right.
And then there was this big battle that happened about 2,000 years ago. It has been rewritten into what we take as the Bible story. But when you're mentioning fourth sect and fifth sect, these are competing groups. And so you were saying the fifth group is with Roman Catholicism, and then this fourth sect is this Black Lodge, the sort of Order of Tsarion types with it. Can you go on further from there a little bit? Sorry, just
Oh,
to,
yeah. These are the terms that the historian Josephus used, or Josephus, whatever way you want to pronounce his name.
the
And
Jewish
he had it.
historian of the first century. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And he liked to look at it that way, that these different sects. There was the John the Baptist group, there was the Galileans, Nazarenes, Essenes, and so
Pedestrians.
you can, yeah. And I think he basically had the Essenes down as the fourth sect, if I remember correctly. And then later, St. Paul creates the fifth sect, which will be an obscenity to the fourth.
The
And
Catholic Church.
yes, I've done a series on St. Paul. We did that quite recently, which goes into all of it. But in my earlier books, it's described as the fact that there was a conflict between these two groups. And it lasted up until about the late 20th century, where it got resolved. And the fourth sect basically took over the fifth. It took hundreds of years. Yeah. So the 20th century opens with a major victory on the part of the fourth sect. Now, the thing that would make this interesting is that the fourth sect are the original socialists or communists. You see? So communism is not a new thing. It goes back to these desert tribes, the Essenes. And one other iteration that came 1,000 years later was the Knights Templar. The Knights Templar are essentially fourth sect. You see? But then when you get into that history, another bunch of interesting things open up because, of course, we know that the fifth sect suppressed the Knights Templar. Right? They fell foul of the papacy because the papacy realized these guys aren't serving us; they're serving another power. So we got to suppress them, and they did suppress them in the 14th century. And it's right after the Templar suppression that a whole bevy of other secret societies leading up to the Illuminati and others, that got formed. There was a whole bevy of them. The Martinists, the Grand Orient, the Strict Observance, the Scottish Rite, all start popping up, and many, many, many more, up until the time of the Illuminati. So when the Templars went underground, they just said, okay, we'll form a lot of other groups, and we'll even infiltrate other groups that have already been around, like the Knights Hospitallers, that are now known as the Knights of Malta. They were always in league anyway. But, they had their story is, I tell that story in all my work as well. And when they went underground, there was a group that worked for them, their own clerics, what I call the clerics, but these were just deputies, very, very educated men who formed their own order. That's also the Order of Malta, who start serving the hidden Templar masters. And so when you asked, who are they really? When you boil it all down, you can say that, fourth sect. But then you've got to look at the Knights of Malta and the Knights Templar as being extremely important. And they were able to infiltrate every other organization that existed. They infiltrated Judaism, and that's a very interesting story. I tell that in articles on the Female Illuminati site. There's the third article, Templars and Jews: The Untold Story. We can link up to that if you want. That will take you through the whole story of how the Jews are connected to the Templars, because I don't believe the Jews are authors of the conspiracy, but some Jews have indeed served it. And that's a nuance that needs to be very much understood, because people are rabidly anti-Semitic for all the wrong reasons, right? But they also infiltrated Islam, and they've also infiltrated Christianity. They've infiltrated everywhere, this group. And they're non-profit. They call themselves non-profit. They're housed in Rome. And their story is absolutely fascinating. So all the articles that you'll find on the Female Illuminati site, go into this in great detail. There's one called From Sword by Sword and Shield, which I highly recommend. And we've done podcasts on all of these on enslaved members and all about it. But I would read these. And then there's an article, I can't remember what number it is, but it's called From Heaven to Earth. And this gets back to our theme of the women. So people who want to follow up on that should read these articles, but maybe even start with this one called From Heaven to Earth, where it talks about the comet. And it talks about other celestial events that took place that had an enormous role in the formation of these female secret societies. Right? So I walk you through that to show something absolutely remarkable that stretched across the world, even to Ireland. Because in Ireland, they talk about priestesses and druidesses, right? It's all there in the legends, just like it is in other parts of the world. So then how did these female sects get mobilized? Well, I walk you through that. It's one of the most fascinating articles you'll ever read. And it will answer a lot of things to do with the conspiracy and who's behind it. The power that they gained from this incident. And yeah, it adds a new dimension to it, to all of this, to everything, that we're talking about.
And again, just a step back, macro picture, just to make sure maybe even new people come into this, what we were talking about. When we're talking about sort of the conspiracy or about the architects of control, I prefer to use that kind of phrase. And we're talking about an incident 2,000 years ago. If you look at knowledge being a source of power, and you look at who's controlled sort of the Western world or most of the world for the last 2,000 years, there's one institution that stands out above all others there. And that's the Vatican, that's the Catholic Church. That is this fifth sect that we've been talking about. And essentially what you've been saying is that they defeated another sect of Judaism, which is known as the fourth sect. That happened 2,000 years ago. The Vatican were largely in control right up until sort of the 1900s. However, there's been these continual wars throughout, partially of how the fourth sect have survived these different secret societies that have been going on. So you're looking at sort of the Order of Tsarion, you're looking at sort of the Knights Templar. They then fracture further into things like Freemasonry and the Illuminati that people know about then today. You'd mentioned that they had fought back, or they then regained control of this fourth sect in the early 1900s. What happened there? What was that incident that they were able to regain control then?
Well, the way I look at it, it's in an article that I have on the Female Illuminati site, and we speculate that there was two documents that came out, one in 1860 and one in 1890, by popes, that initiated a thing called Christian socialism. First time it had ever been heard. And as far as I'm concerned, those documents announced the fact that behind the scenes, this change had happened. Because there is no way that the original form of conservative Christianity, as we know it in the Vatican, love it or hate it, would have ever bothered with this nonsense. Because it's basically Marxism. So, and then when you scroll forward and move into the 20th century, and you notice the rise of Bolshevism and how the Vatican backed that up, how it was involved, and then down, up until the Vatican II, and then John Paul, and then the coming down of the wall in all of these other things that happened clearly show you that a major change to the left has taken place for Catholicism. And it bamboozled ordinary hardcore Catholics. They couldn't understand what this was all about, particularly in the south of Ireland, but other places too, that had been really, really conservative. And now you're getting nothing but woke priests, right? Wearing their hair out, dressing in pink, telling you that it's fine that you can cross gender. We've got to accept everybody equally and all this rubbish. And Jesus was a humanitarian and a philanthropist. All these lies, right, that swept the world. This is what I'm talking about.
And when you're saying this Christian socialism, maybe it's important here to just tread water for a little bit more about this fourth sect and their belief system. And my understanding of what they really believed, and again, these are the Essenes, or the Essenes as they're described. They're written about in the Dead Sea Scrolls as well, which is another thing that you recently did a series upon. And the essence of their belief system is something known as Gnosticism. I don't think we've really gone into detail of what Gnosticism is. My, I guess, understanding of it is it's sort of like a world denying or a body denial. It's more about I'm a spirit trapped in a body, and I want and the body and the physical world is evil. Can you maybe give us a little bit more details about what this fourth sect actually believes? What is Gnosticism? How does that tie into this political philosophy of socialism that we're seeing on the rise?
Oh, yes, they were. You see, these Essenes, as well as the Galileans and the Nazarenes and the
Mm,
Ebionites and other groups that were
mm,
there, were deeply influenced by Egyptian mystery school traditions that had come
right.
out of Alexandria and other hotspots in Egypt.
Mm,
It's like those were the big teachers of the time, and all these other groups in Parthia and in Syria and in Palestine, and in Israel kind of had an ear, knew about these
mm,
guys. And sometimes these big honchos or their agents would come visit.
mm.
Yeah. So there was a much more cosmopolitan sort of a vibe going than we could ever imagine, that we've been taught. It's all been, everything we're talking about here has been suppressed.
Just to pause for 1 second there. Essentially, we have throughout human society these secret societies or more elitist schools of thought that's often hidden, so they're more esoteric. And this goes right the way back to ancient Egypt. And it's this knowledge that's slowly passed on to people who are sort of the rulers, the kings, the aristocracy. And then it's that knowledge that has fallen into the hands of sort of the fourth sect. And they use this for political power and things. But it's a school of thought within it, then, is that this Gnosticism, this is what they're learning from? Or have they perverted the teachings? Or is this what always has been taught?
Well, let's use the word hybridize instead of that. But yeah, it amounts to a kind of cannibalization. As each new teacher, like John the Baptist, like Jesus, like Paul, you know, and the dozen other Judaic teachers that I mentioned in the series that were around at the time, they have, they have the ability to adapt the story. And as I say, they all were enamored by what was happening in Egypt. That was the focus. And therefore, anything that came out of Egypt from this mystery school tradition was eaten up. The city of Alexandria, and there's other areas as well, basically numerous areas where schools of learning existed. And therefore, the mystery school tradition started to move out into other lands, patterning itself on Heliopolis or Hermopolis or Thebes. You know what I mean? They'd all try to create their own schools. And so this is what John the Baptist did. And this is what the Jesus figure did. And Paul, in his own way, did. They all had their own schools. And it's a very, very interesting story about how things were tweaked. In some of these paths, just like the John the Baptist, women played a major role. And Jesus picked up, the figure we know as Jesus, picked up on that. And he had women, as it says, minister to his need. Meaning they paid all the bills. They looked after everything. Now you got to be super rich to be doing things like that. Right? To have 5,000 people gather, and they know that that was an army, right? The secret behind that was that's how an army would gather. So these people had tremendous power. And of course, they had a built-in enemy. They had a made-to-order enemy in the form of Rome. The Roman invasion, if you want to call it that, right? Leading to the Jewish revolt, which smashed everything. And the group that we're talking about, the fourth sect, then, although it lost out later on to the fifth sect that, went to Rome and then became the big edifice we know, yeah, it became dominant. But the fourth sect went underground. And after the Jewish revolt, they basically became drug dealers. They sustained themselves by going into the underground and becoming the Black Lodge and the Black Hand. And they're up to all sorts of nonsense. But drug dealing and contraband would have been one of the bigger things that they were involved. They were involved in a lot of other things as well, but drug dealing was the main way for them to make money. Because essentially, this is a Dionysian cult. There's a lot of things people don't understand anything about this. They were a branch of the Dionysian cult, yeah.
So when you said drug dealing, you're meaning things like mushrooms and about psilocybin and that sort of
Yeah.
mystical experiences that they induce, and they would have a monopoly on that sort of information,
Yeah.
those rites of passages.
That's exactly right. Yeah, and the women played a role in this as well, right? and it was a way for them to make money. They were destroyed in their one iteration, in their aspirations. They had followed Jesus. He was a Parthian who gained a lot of support from local Jews who had been invaded by Rome. So he had already standing, sort of army and people who would listen to him. But it all failed. It was a miserable failure. And so they were scattered to the four winds. And some of this group then decided to go underground and peddle drugs for money. And they became the Black Hand. And this is why you have this entering into Europe, at a certain point. It's one of the branches. And this is usually whistleblown in something like the James Bond series franchise. Not just them, but you've got many shows that will whistleblow this if you know what you're looking at. It's been well and truly whistleblown.
I'll maybe come back into the detail of what happened there during the Jewish revolt 2,000 years ago, but I'd rudely interrupted you earlier when I asked you about Gnosticism and the link with this socialism and things. Forgive me, would you go back over that territory a little bit?
Well, Gnosticism, people thought that it had its roots in Plato, and this is an argument that's gone on for years, as whether that's true or not. But Plato there was a resurrection of Platonism about a couple of hundred years later in what we call Neoplatonism. And some people say that no, the leaders of Neoplatonism weren't really Gnostics at all. Other people say, no, there's a lot of Gnosticism in their work. Gnosticism is one of these things, a philosophy was knocking around, in the first century. And many people subscribed to it. And we've done numerous shows on it. I've even done premium shows on it. I'm not a Gnostic and I'm not in favor of any of its tenets. But it's a fascinating thing to understand. And it comes out of the East. It's really an Oriental type philosophy. And you're quite right when you said that it degrades the body, which is seen as the cage of the soul. And it even degrades the planet and nature and the natural world. So I got interested in
and the material world.
That's
another way to think of it.
Yeah. And in fact, they're calling it material world, right? Things go bad right from the start. So because look, back then, think of medicine, how primitive it was. If you had a fucking sty in your eye, if you had a toothache, right, let alone a real wound from a fall or a fight with an animal or whatever, or if you had high blood pressure, nobody could fix it. And when you died in fucking agony. All over the Levant, all over the world. Worms would get in your feet. We don't need to go into all the gory details. But if you can use your imagination, even the drinking of poisoned water, of bad food that rodents had already chewed on and all that fucking filth, the open sewers. I mean, you only have to go to India now. It's exactly the same as it was back then, thousands of years ago. So man died in absolute abject agony from things that today would be considered laughable, right? So naturally, it was very easy for the Gnostic paradigm to get inserted into people's minds that this is just one veil of tears, one veil of suffering. I'm walking through the valley of death type of thing. It caught on because people's lives were fucking miserable. Look at the book of, Lot.
And this was a way for an answer to people's suffering. So people suffered, they look for sort of, why do I suffer with it? And the Gnostics came along and said, oh, you're a spirit trapped in a body. It's the body that's evil. It's all of this material world that's evil. Your body's just a part of that. It is that you have to deny. This is why you see all these kind of ascetic practices of like maybe extreme fasting, doing these drug rituals. And I think it gets a little bit more into the cult and what sort of practices go on there today with it. When you're speaking again about Gnosticism, about this world denial, how does this tie into what we see today when we look around with these kind of histrionics that we spoke about, these discontents, these types of socialists, these left-wing type of people? Are they just people following this ideology that has been passed on from the fourth sect that has been emanated through society? Is that sort of what's going on?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. Just in today, you have the same types of discontents that will head down to the Amazon with their matted hair and their tie-dyes and suck a lot of drugs and then tell you that there's another dimension.
Yeah, I see.
And that this world is just nothing but evil, right? It happened back then. When you have the bad health and you get this vision of a corrupt world, but then, like in India, see all those sages and rishis and sannyasis that you see on the banks of the Ganges, they're all into drugs. They all smoke pot on a massive level, right? Drugs has been part of their culture for thousands of years. And so you got to factor that in. The bong, right? They're on it. And they were in Persia, and they were in the Middle East. And so you have to add all of this together. And some of them are on even much more powerful drugs, like poppies and Amanita muscaria and things that really put you out of your head. And this then opens up what they think are spiritual realms. Now, the Essenes were definitely into this. They were Gnostic to the degree that they lived in a boiling hot desert, right? Running around in this God-forsaken community, waiting for the sky to open and waiting for angels and God to descend to help them wipe out their enemies, i.e. the Romans. That's all they did. That's all they did. They just humbled themselves. They ate frugally. They were ascetic, as you say, right? And many of these other groups were the same. I'm sure that John the Baptist, when they say he ran around eating only locusts and honey, same old fucking story, right? They're all out of their mind. Just type in the word stylite and read about that. So these were the early stylites, the early ascetics, the flagellants, waiting for the sky to open, waiting for divine help, because they were on this stuff. Morning, noon, and night. That's why when later I said that some of them went on to become a very powerful underground drug cult. That wouldn't have been a bother to them. You see, because they felt that one of the problems was that the rest of the human race did not come to their rescue because they were unenlightened. They have to be initiated into the Gnostic mystery. So let's get them all. We're all high. Let them all get high. So we're not thinking we're doing evil when we sell these drugs. We're awakening people.
Yeah.
The human race sat by when all of this colonization and horror took place because they didn't see things like we do. You know? So if we tell you, and we write a book that says God created Adam and Eve, but he created Adam first, and Eve came from his body. Hey, you got it? Man comes first and woman comes next. Isn't that great? You go, yeah, right.
Yeah. I see.
And there we go. Everyone will pull out their Bible and slap you over the head with it and going, it's God's holy word. Okay? If God wants Jonah to be swallowed by a whale for 3 days and 3 nights, he'll be swallowed by a whale. God can do anything. He can make man come before woman. What kind of fucking irrationality is that?
Yeah.
See? So of course you're denying physical law. Of course you're going to deny natural law. You're up in the clouds. You can believe anything you want. And they had some really nasty fucking leaders, right? People who were into these love feasts. People who were into orgies. People who, we don't even, that's why I had to wait for years before I could get to do my little show on the, Dead Sea Scrolls. I had so much information. But I wanted to do it in the right order so that you could bring out the absolute horror of what we're talking about. And it hasn't gone away. Today, there's certain minds that subconsciously feel that the body is a prison and they want to get out of it.
These are the socialists.
Yeah.
The whole trans thing, for fuck's sake.
Yeah. Oh, yes. It's all linked to what we're talking about. Ultimately, as a religion, when you move it up to the religious level, you'll find that these people are not Hermeticists. They're Hermeticists of the time that were also very popular during this period that Gnosticism was abroad. Were saying that your problems, mate, are not caused by the earth itself being a lower place. It's your relationship with the earth that is wanting. You're not meticulously studying the insects. You're not meticulously studying the plant life, the herbs. You're not meticulously studying the elements and the properties. That's why you're fucking sick. But like the ancient Egyptians, we can do better. We've got to continue to do better. And the earth is our teacher. Love it, preserve it, look after it, and learn from it.
It's sort of like what you said before. The unconscious, whatever face you turn towards the unconscious is the face it turns back to you.
Yes.
And if it's not reverence and gratitude and a curiosity, then it's going to be a hellish, sort of nightmare tyranny, something that comes to destroy you then, and fearful, because that's how you turn towards it. And I see what you're saying. Yeah.
And we know that this is true because we have the history of herbalism to prove my point. Where did that come from? That means that there were people in this world who were trying to do the right thing many, many thousands of years ago.
Is the Druid types?
Exactly. We know they existed. We know that this is a fact. The Druids, as I present them, in my book, I present the Druids as those who were trying to heal the deeper trauma, when we talk about the earth cataclysms, the Druids were aware of it. And so they were a priesthood dedicated to healing the deep wound that we spoke of earlier on. They didn't succeed because they were wiped out. But that was their mandate. And this meant a very deep understanding of the natural order. Very, very deep. There were tree worshippers. I've written 2 volumes on that to show just how deep this went. And so your history of herbalism proves it. Cannot be denied. You see? But again, the sorcerers, Meritaten was one leader, Akhenaten was another, and they've had plenty. These sorcerers conquered the Druids, conquered the Arya, as they're better called. So Ireland is called Arya land. That's where the word comes from. Because Ireland was the center of the Arya. And they were conquered, they were wiped out. And their knowledge was appropriated. So when you said, why is it evil? It's because, right, the knowledge was taken by the Milesians, by the Atenists. It wasn't used for the good of mankind. These are the old elders who discovered that it's better to keep people in trauma. They make better obedient workers. So where the Druids were trying to heal, and do you realize had they been in charge of our world, where we'd be right now? We wouldn't be anywhere. We couldn't even imagine it. Right? But when they were toppled, and I tell that whole story in the books and the website, well, then, everything got heavily truncated, and we got the evil ones. And they slapped their logos on the money. They slapped their logos on everything we see. They slapped their logos on the flags, on the institutions of government, and on a lot of other things, just to let you know, here we are, we're here now. And slowly, they even overtook their rivals. The conflict of the 4th and 5th. Doesn't mean you have to love the 5th sect. At the end of the day, were they any better? Or they were just as corrupt or evil. But I'm just talking about the fact that there was a fight between the two, and the 4th sect always swore revenge. And they brought along worldwide socialism. I have an article called The Red Papacy, which will walk people through this as well, you see. And so this red papacy ruled the world until it finally won. It finally got its popes in power. Long, long struggle to do that. There were people who fought it, but then they were overcome. And the 20th century is their slow incursion, you see, to contaminate Roman Catholicism. And that's a whole story in itself of how they managed that. They have managed it. So that's no option anymore. Right. For people. It's bogus. But these 4th sect have completely controlled the media. They even formed the media. They were so wealthy from all this drug trading. And the Knights Templars had the ships, you know what I mean, to be moving all of this. And they were also bankers. The Jews were not the first bankers. It was the Knights Templar. They may have used other people later on, when they got fat and rich, and and also they got persecuted, so they had to go underground. So they made Jews take over because they knew they were thrifty, they knew they were diligent, and they knew that we'll fucking wipe you out if you ever rebel against us. So the Jew had to go along with the gig. So they became the money lenders that everybody knows about. But as a matter of fact, they own nothing. They're entirely in service to another force that is not Jewish. There's another fallacy that it's abroad there with people who haven't done their fucking homework, right? So yeah, there's that. But the original moneylenders and the original bankers were the Knights Templar, and they didn't mind putting their logos and symbols on it if you know how to decode it. And you just do a little bit of homework, you'll find out all of this. And then with that money, they were then able to open publishers and lawyers and equestrian orders, like we already mentioned, chivalric orders, both on the Protestant side and both on the Catholic side. That means nothing. Like we said, when they infiltrated Judaism, they were able to form the Frankists, The Sabbateans, you see, they had many groups working for them. Jews know about it. All Jews know about it and warned their communities, watch out for these people. They're not what you think. Christians knew about it too and warned, but nobody listened. You know. Yep.
And maybe just to, again, step back, try to take the macro picture. We've been speaking quite a lot about then secret societies. I, you'd spoke about how the ideology had been used. Or actually, let me just think for 1 second. There are hierarchies in society. We already know there are different secret societies. What goes on is that knowledge is sort of transferred within those and is used to gain power, as well as different allegiances within the secret societies. And you can use your group versus all the outer groups then. What's been going on with these secret societies is they've been evolving over the last couple of thousand years, largely led by this fourth sect. We've been discussing the ideology of it being this kind of Gnosticism, this world denying, body denying, I'm a spirit trapped. They gained control then at the early 1900s. And what we're seeing in modern society is an emanation of that kind of psychology. And that's what you see of the modern left, is what these people are thinking. And I think what got me into a lot of this work initially was an understanding that the information that is used to enslave you is the same information you can then try to invert, kind of that alchemical type of way, try to transmute it. And it can be the information that can try to then free you. And that's what sort of led me down this kind of path of studying of psychology and about manipulation, because it's so obviously that's what's going on all around us. It's just that most people are still asleep to it and they don't understand what we've been discussing these last 7, 8 episodes, these structures of the psyche and all this kind of information. So I think that's largely what the conspiracy is you have these smaller groups within society, they're battling for power, and we can sort of know them by their fruits, and we can know them by their ideologies that we see all around us. Is there anything I'm missing there? Is there anything that I've not really got a hold of, or anything you want to add on to that, just for people to maybe take away as a little nut in itself?
No, I think you got it 100% right. They are absolutely dependent on our ignorance and are not listening to the wise that have also written on this and shown it up. But there's a lot of information to sift through as well and to digest. There's a knee-jerk reaction when you talk about, say, something like female secret societies or, another, or the drug dealing, whatever. Some people would react, and they may have a very limited idea of ancient history as well, how important drugs were. But then they have to study the people who were experts at that, study these Eleusinian mysteries, study the cult of Dionysus, study the ancient goddess traditions to find out just how much drugs were involved in all of that, and learn how to read between the lines. But you need the curiosity, and I always mention this one, patience. Because when you start studying this, you will inevitably be led down into false alleys. It's inevitable, right? Like the whole Jewish anti-Semitic thing, right? You'll be led on a wild goose chase through that and many other areas. So you have to have the patience to say, okay, made a mistake. Let me back out, you see, and go and look a little deeper.
Just to clear that up for people, when we're saying the sort of the Jewish thing, we're talking about a small subsect within them that use Jewishness as a cloak in the same way they use Catholicism as a cloak or Protestantism as a cloak. People are seeing some of this, what you call the Dragon Court, the Black Lodge, their actions, and they're going, oh, that's Israel, that's the Jews. And that's the sort of low resolution thinking that you're trying to combat against.
Oh, yeah. I mean, simple logic tells you it's not a Jewish conspiracy. They're not even demographically. The thing is so nonsensical. I've done 2 programs called Princes of Light, but as I said, people can go to the female Illuminati. If they're very serious, read those articles, read article number 3, then go listen. And I've got one called Princes of Light, another article. Read that. It's only 2 articles. Take a couple of hours and you'll have the whole thing sorted. Then listen to our podcasts on the subject so that you can be walked through logically. Then I have one called No Jewish Conspiracy podcast, right? Well, I've done it. And to show you what nonsense it is. And while you're batting down on that like a hungry hyena, right, the real culprits are laughing all the way to the bank. It's not to say that people with Jewish names weren't part of a conspiracy. They sure as hell were. But I explain a lot of that as to why that is. You see, to bring people back to sanity. and to show you that this socialism doesn't give a damn about any of that. And Karl Marx he was a Jew by birth, but he didn't give a damn about the Jewish people. Right? In fact, he hated them, as all of these Sabbateans and Frankists do. And where did they get their funding? How did they get mobilized? It's a very interesting story. They were seduced, just like any of the left-wing lunatics in Judaism today. But are those left-wing lunatic Jews, are they any worse than the woke Gentiles that run the streets and who outnumber them in their thousands and millions? It's the same story in the past. No, this is very much a Gentile conspiracy, and that's another one of these things that tell you the knee-jerk reaction. But you got to go beyond that. You got to go beyond your Catholic Protestant divides, rich and poor, capitalist and non-capitalist, communist, and whatever. You got to go beyond all that. You're never going to crack it if you just look at it through those lenses. In fact, those lenses have often been designed to make sure that you don't see the true picture while you're caught in that shit. Right? There's the insider smiles of the boys in charge. Yeah, and they have their own people's champions out there to mobilize on that, to weaponize all of those things so that you stay there. You've got to go beyond. You've got to go into all these subjects that we're talking about. How does world catastrophe fit in? And you're quite right. Psychoanalysis couldn't have even started in the 1890s if the psyche itself wasn't now at least slightly stabilized to be able to look, because it knows that if you look into the unconscious, there's many things that you don't want to see there, like this wound, like the ruins of a past epochal life. It's all in ruins there. It's in the consciousness of everyone. And so collectively, there's this blind spot, you see? And so we live in a tiny little circle of light provided by the ego. And we take that little cage for our reality. And we've made do. And the left brain is saying, I'm in control, I'm in control, I'm in control. I got the clipboard. You just ask me. You don't need anybody else. Don't be opening any doors. Don't be looking under any rugs. You just keep focused on what I'm showing you. Even these McGilchrists know nothing about ancestral cataclysm. You see where we're at? Even the highest in the land can't do what we've just done. It never crosses their mind. And the ones who know about catastrophism, they're not interested in psychology or conspiracy. Great guns! Right?
Yeah,
and yet the whole essence of it is to bring these things together to the table. There's nothing wrong with it. And in fact, wrong with it? No. When you do that, then things start to shine. Then you go, oh my God. You see, and then you're encouraged to do it more.
It makes me think a little bit. We started the conversation off speaking about the intellect. We were just speaking there about the ego. We haven't really mentioned the superego. And one of the things, or one of the mechanisms that I think the architects of control try to do is by this overemphasis on the intelligence and left brain thinking, is it heightens maybe the voice of the superego, and then that directs us more and partially turns us away from listening towards the conscience or to the unconscious, where we can get more information or maybe a better orientation to life. What's your thoughts there? And just again, between the intelligence, the superego, how does that play into this?
Well, the superego, remember, is understood completely as the crowd in your head. It's the importation of the parental demands upon you, which are considerable. And in the end, because the interjection of these imagos is not one-to-one, that would be one phenomenon. It's magnified and amplified, so that now you can cut the cord to the physical parent, and the tyrant in the head can operate regardless. This is the great, great problem. Yeah. And then later, you go to your teachers, you go to your experts, you go to your warlord, right? You go to whatever. At the same time, the superego embodied a self-image. But that self-image, as you and I have talked about before, is rather weak. It is a Frankensteinian thing stitched up at the fucking back. It is made up of the demands and the expectations of these other imagos. It's not the real self. but you put all your life force and energy into making it the real self, meaning you identify with it. Jung called it the persona. Horney called it the idealized image. And every time you put energy into it, it's subtracting energy from this true image of the self, which is buried so far deep, we might as well not even bother talking about it. And you never get in touch with it unless you go through what's called a dark night of the soul. Yeah. So, but then what happens, whereas in the past, this image of yourself, a shambles as it was, got you through 40, 50 years of life. Not a good life, but it got you through. Now, it's not even getting you through your teenage years. Why? Because it rubs up against reality.
This is what's going on.
That's
Yeah,
what's going on. And therefore,
exactly
it
what's
needs to
going
be uninstalled. But what do I put in its place?
on. Yeah,
What, some pervert? Or a number of them
yeah.
that the media and your society provides. They've normalized the degenerate, the deviant, the malingerer, the idiot, the fool.
The big names you hear about today going on in sort of the online conversation is about Nick Fuentes, and about, you'll see a huge interview he did with Piers Morgan, and there's a lot of what the chatter on X is about, and about YouTube and different things. I think even the mainstream news in the UK speaking about him, like the BBC and ITV and all these types. And exactly what's happening, you can see in the interview, is that he can see through, or see this breaking down in this idealized image, this persona that is that's sort of portrayed. And you see Piers Morgan being the voice of the crowd, the voice of the superego. And their generation has just sort of moved past that. They go, it's all bullshit. We can all see the lies behind it. We can see this idealized image, and then we can see what real life is, and we see sort of the shadow, because you can't hide it on the internet. Everything's all filmed. Everything's all online for us to see a different aspect of human nature. And so I'm not saying he's right. I'm not saying I agree with him and everything. I'm just saying that's objectively what's happening. Is this younger generation, is this ego ideal is just broken down, and now everything's sort of just let loose and coming through.
Yeah. It was never strong to begin with. And it never should have been uninstallable. But it is, because it is an affront to nature. When the imago is not heroic, right? When it is not heroic, it's doomed. It has a short shelf life. And sadly, in girls and boys, this imago, this self-schema isn't even remotely, it's maggot-filled. It's fucking rotten. And it was put in by rotten, unlovable flunkies. And somewhere around your teenage years, it starts to bother you, the stench. So you've got to inebriate yourself. You've got to distract yourself. You've got to go to the crowd of other people exactly like you and clan up with them to say, well, see, I'm not so bad. It's a shared zombie fest. It's a shared, I'm in the zombie apocalypse, so I look okay. I'm not too bad. And everybody gives them the cues and affectations, pats on the back, which you need anyway. The whole idea of the superego was to get the attention and the affection and the approval of other people. Well, hey, this works a grand, because our societies have made these cliques for you to exactly do that. The subculture has been designed by the Marcusans to say, you're going to get it. Become a queer, become a lesbian, become a homo, right? And you're in. And they'll give you all the approval. And they'll take up a lot of years of your life. And wear it with pride. Flaunt it. And fucking hell, they do. It gets worse and worse and worse. It's just a downhill spiral. You see? And then it becomes weaponized, so that if they ram it down your throat, they become so militant. They don't just do what they do behind closed doors and rational people couldn't care less. No. They now come back out into the streets to make you, right, an oppressor. When in fact what they're doing is so anti-natural. But then you see, they force you into position of opposition. And that's what's been happening, and it's been successful. And the media and the police now actually come after you should you say something wrong. They've all done it. Facebook, Google, they've all done it. And you see, so it's rotten. But when you dig down deep into it, it's exactly as you say. I have to uninstall this image, but I can't. But it's not going to be a healthy process, because what do I put in its place? I've never even met a hero. I wouldn't recognize one if I saw it, and I probably wouldn't even like it. I've been so deprogrammed that I wouldn't even like a hero if I met one. That's what I call necrophilus. And the media is brilliant at putting up these necrophilus people that you will then, try to scan, right? Your superego, or your ego ideal scans it to see, but they put enough pseudo-heroic imagery around it. Money, yes, a couple of Bentleys, lots of chicks. And you might fall for it. And people are falling for it. And so they install these hollow, you see, you're so vulnerable, you're so weak, you're so fragile, but you've got to have a self-image. You got to. You can't function without one. So life has crushed reality. It says, no, the one you've got isn't up to speed. It's causing you nothing but tension. So I get rid of it and identify with such and such. And there's always going to be people's champions ready and waiting. So what we've done, though, is we are back engineering all these aberrations that you see being filmed, right? See, I've been talking about this all my life, but nobody believed me because the film wasn't there. The footage wasn't there. They just mocked you, just laughed at you, thought you were crazy. But now one good thing has actually happened. This has become obvious because of social media.
Everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah. So now when somebody like myself talks after bringing together all these years of study, you get a hearing more now. And that's good.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of territory again today, and I think we're actually teeing up really nicely something I'd asked you in an email. Because there's so much footage of these types of people that you see now, it might be worthwhile maybe just going through one of these videos once of these sort of this type of discontent that we've been speaking about, this kind of leftist that has joined the group. Literally everything we've been laying out is perfectly encapsulated in a little video that we'll cover in the future, but I think we got a lot more in the detail about who's behind the conspiracy today. I think that was very important work to go over as well, about the importance of how a lot of this is initiated with these cataclysms of the past. This led to this birth of the ego. This led to what we're seeing of this sort of split of the left brain, right brain, and we're having is this left brain dominant society. Again, all used by these architects of control who know what we're speaking of. Is there anything you'd like to add just as a final comment, Michael? We'll maybe wrap it up after that.
No, I think we've really done a good job. You started with the quote from Neumann about, the irrational aspect within us. And that will never be something that you can be computing or measuring. It not only gives rise to the path, but it gives rise to what we call creativity. It gives rise to the dream world and to the imagination and spontaneity and a connection to nature. And so we must not demonize the unconscious. There is that school. And it's like seeing the fish from two sides of the tank. You've got to be very careful to be able to go around it. Yes, there can be demonic aspects of the unconscious, but are they being caused when the unconscious is rebelling against the imposition that's being placed on it by these forces that go out, like you go out in a safari to murder and kill and lay down fences and barbed wire fences? Is that, see, there's something instinctive within us that's millions of years old that resists it. So then you say, oh, Freud got it wrong. Man is not bestial in his origins. The beast is the resistor. That's really a thing that is inherently free and freedom-loving. But then what that does is if you take it to its extreme, it recontextualizes the story completely, because now the beast is actually the man of society that is trying to colonize the pure, that is trying to dam the river, that is trying to strengthen the wall between us and the mystery that is ourselves. You see? The organization man. So the beast now becomes a social creature, total reverse. And he has his own mandates and he has his own institutions, and he has his own philosophy. Now, what Freud would have to admit, and Jung admitted, is that the more and more that this creature gets cut off from the unconscious, and that's his ultimate organic root, what kind of a being could he possibly become except a emaciated, shallow obscenity? Paper thin. Just a genuine fake from top to bottom. And then the conspiracy aspect comes in because that fragile puppet, that mannequin that's walking around posing as a real human being, now must have stabilizers, right? So that being must rely on the institutions that big government provides for it to say, oh, good, I've got my norms. I've got my stabilizers. I know what to think. I know what to believe. I know what to buy. I know who to marry. And I know where to send my kids for their education. It's all on wheels. It's all been pre-laid out in front of me. Now, I may be screaming inside, but as some of these Irish Froms are showing, no, the sick individual is the one who's adjusted to the society, right? He's sick because there's a real voice plaguing him from within, which is his self, but he doesn't want to awaken it. This is all a mistake, as psychologists found out. Psychology and psychoanalysis is not the same thing as big psychiatry. Psychiatry got it right. You're not coming for anything more than a car wash, because the image we just spoken about, the weak imago, hasn't got the robustness to handle even a few of life's actual challenges. So we've got psychoanalysis for you. We've got big psychiatry. You just come in like you bring your car in for a tune-up, and we'll sort you out. Even if we got to chemically lobotomize you, even if we got to fill your kids full of drugs, it doesn't matter. That's what you want. The original premise, which your higher form of psychologist, like say an Abraham Maslow, was saying, is to come for self-actualization, like the existentialists. You're coming, right? Like Otto Rank, Binswanger. They're saying you're coming to awaken the authentic self, which will push against all this fucking filth and bring you to a sense of wholesome and wholeness and normality. No, we weren't. We were in bad faith, right? Sartre's bad faith, inauthenticity. We want to adjust to the abnormal world. Tell us how to do it quick. And the crowd is a manifestation of exactly the same instinct, except that it is more demanding. Right? It's saying, big government, you were employed to be a dispensing machine for all the titillation that's to keep me from being a self. How dare you become niggardly? Or how dare you churn out the same shit every year? We want more. And government goes, we know. Right? Disney and Hollywood and Silicon Valley and whatever you've got, Madison Avenue, go, we're on it. Hold on, slow down. We've got where's our Marcusan file? Shit, we're on it. Yeah, don't you worry. We've got virtual headsets coming. We got implants. We got bots. You're going to love it. Just hold on tight. But the person in the streets who's banging the spoon doesn't want to be seen on camera as being what I've just described. So you have to have the camouflage. The crowd has worked it out to say, we've got a cause. Crippled kids, minorities from Somalia, or whatever the fuck you can drag out from the pits of hell. This is the hellscape today, because that's the virtue signaling that covers up the reality. That's why you must keep the cameras rolling. Don't reduce it to humor. Study it psychologically, because they will tell you what they are. Do it in stages. Don't believe me. Observe it, because it's going to be happening with your own sons and daughters. You see, and people, maybe not your kids, but the neighbor's kids, your family's kids, other brothers and sisters, right? You're going to have at least one of these people turn kooky, especially when they go to school and they're up against these she-boons that are teaching from the front of the class. And these fucking degenerates who've got a hymn sheet and they hone in on you if you're sensitive or creative or whatever. And they are programmed and paid to mess with your mind, to mess with your psyche. Now, women are 100% to blame for this because it was, the parents' teachers' associations were mothers who were meant to be there at the school, not the father who's out working. So since the 1940s and 50s, this all happened under the watch of the mothers. They are 100% to blame without any doubt. Yeah. Get out your book called None Dare Call It Education by John Stormer. Get out your John Taylor Gatto's, right? And find out what happened under the watch of self-absorbed, hedonistic, fashion-infatuated women, spending millions on the shit that these magazines and these billboards, offered them. And while their own kids' minds were being plundered in school, they trusted it, or PBS or NPR, and the same thing in England with the BBC and what have you, right? All the lies, and they sat and watched it all through the afternoon. They'd watch these sitcoms, Brookside, EastEnders, you name it, being programmed on a daily, hourly basis. Horrendous stuff that should have been torn up and thrown out and say, oh, no, we don't want that. No, they all went for it.
It really just all boils down to one of these mute things we're talking about. It's the voice of the crowd in your head. It's whether you choose to listen to it or choose to listen to the voice of the conscience, the voice of the authentic self. As we can see, so many people around us choose the voice of the crowd. They want to be the institutionalized man. They want to identify with the persona instead of being a real person more so. And so they choose to cut off the unconscious and what comes from it. And that's their tie to nature. And hence why they try to push nature away and denigrate it so much. Hence why they say it's the natural world so evil, and this is why the body's evil, and that's why I'm trapped in the body. Maybe a quote I'll leave people with is one from J. Krishnamurti. We spoke about him before. It's one of my favorite ones of his. He said, "It's no sign of health to be well adjusted to an insanely sick society." And so I guess what we're trying to do here is learn how we're sick. And maybe through that, we can learn how to undo it and go the other way, become more free.
Absolutely. Yes, that's the answer. Yeah. Stop prostituting ourselves to an insane society and trying to prop it up. Stop selling yourself on the street for a tiny little bit of approval. Show some heroism and ability to push back at that. And again, discover the dynamics of tyranny, the anatomy of tyranny. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much again, Michael. I really, really appreciate it. And thank you for all your years of work and trying to bring this information forward. And thank you. Thank you to all the listeners as well, too. Tune in for the next episode. Thank you very much for everybody watching. That's for leaving comments and likes. I'm reading them all and I really do appreciate it. And those likes and comments and shares really help a new channel try to grow. Hopefully, the more I can try to grow it, the more time I can spend in dedicating towards this, because I think we're going to go into some interesting directions going forward. Thank you once again, Michael. Thank you everyone else for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.